meeting is being recorded. It's always nice for Zoom to tell us that. All right, thank you everybody for coming today. Today meetup is our September AWS user group meetup. We are going to be talking about AWS cloud governance and security through automation. So we've got some demos today. We're going to talk about some NIST compliancy, and we're just going to have fun. Like I said, it's always an informal session. So you guys have questions, shoot them in the Zoom chat or just raise them to us as we talk about these things. So you can go off mute, you can turn on your video, you can do whatever you're comfortable with. So we're excited to talk to you about that today. I'm going to go ahead and go through some updates that we have that I know I've got some from AWS, I've got some from myself, and so we'll go ahead and walk through some of those. Before I go through any of those updates, does anybody have any AWS projects that they're working on? I know I was just talking with CJ about an interesting one, and he seems to be taking it a lot further than I am, but does anybody have any projects that they're working on that they want to talk about? No? That's fine. It's all good. So we'll move on from that. Is anybody, I always like to open up the floor, is anybody hiring, looking for a job? They have anything they want to discuss from that perspective?
Hey, James, I want to touch on something I'm working right now.
Okay.
I'm working on building out, using some of the documentation already provided by AWS plus other resources, building out a decision matrix on how to choose between AWS GovCloud and other offerings like FedRAMP, moderate FedRAMP. I can't remember what the other one is, but doing some research on that now.
Huh. I wonder if Jason can help you with that one. All right, for if I need to, which cloud I need to, or because I know GovCloud's a specifically different one, but from like, you're talking about like what FedRAMP things that you need to implement into your accounts to be FedRAMP compliant?
So there's an offering called
like a service to use.
So it's AWS Commercial FedRAMP Moderate is how you describe the offering. And the question is that good enough for the type of application that you're going to have? And being able to narrow that set of questions down to the smallest possible. AWS Commercial is cheaper than AWS Government. So that's typically why a vendor or why an institution would want to go with the commercial version instead of the GovCloud, which is fine as long as all those compliance and regulatory requirements are met.
Yeah, well, I learned something new today. I didn't know about commercial FedRAMP moderate, so that's always fun. So thanks for that. Hey, does anybody else have anything any projects that they are working on that they want to talk about? No? Okay. Well, I got a couple updates that I wanted to share. We'll start with the fun one first. Have you guys seen this one yet from Forrest Bezel? The 168 AWS services in 2 minutes.
Oh yeah,
a fun one. So I'll go ahead and I'll post this link to the meetup, but he goes through a lot of them, and it's pretty funny. So I just wanted to make sure everybody got a laugh and they saw that.
Yeah, I saw it. That was good.
Yeah, it was a good one. Yeah. From an AWS blog post or updates, there's a couple interesting ones. I mean, they always post updates. So the one that I thought was pretty big was AWS Federated for Amazon EKS supports Amazon EFS. So EFS, the Elastic File System. So if you're provisioning EKS nodes on Federated, it will support EFS now. I've seen a lot of questions around Stack Overflow about how can I manage my file systems from that perspective, because I think Federated only gives you about 10 gigs of working space, or am I thinking of on ECS? I can't remember, but you don't get much working space from a container's perspective. So if you could do that with EFS, it now supports it. So that's exciting. Anybody else run into any issues around that? Is anybody running EKS or anything on Federated? No? Okay. I'm going to keep asking questions even if people don't answer them. So,
Yeah, I'll give you some response here. No, I don't use either personally. When trying out Fargate, yeah, that was kind of annoying with bigger workloads. It's like give you 10 gig for the image space and then 20 gig for the ephemeral storage. But I'm
there
pretty
you go. Yeah.
EFS for like when you think big flat file projects that you just can't get around, that seems like it would be a pretty good matchup.
Yeah.
I saw that they have EFS on Lambda as well, which is
I
interesting.
did not see that.
I've not tried it yet. I'm not quite sure what I would do with it, but it's out
It's
there.
an interesting use case. Yeah. Like Lambda, they upped the execution time to what, about 15 minutes now. So
That's right.
if you're processing something on EFS, I think it's going to take longer than 15 minutes. So that's an interesting use case.
Yeah, I was doing something on Lambda where I was rendering images from a 3D model, and it always ran out of time. Just barely, but we couldn't max it out. But now with the extended times and having EFS as well, I mean that might actually work now.
Yeah.
Oh well, I'm not there anymore, so.
For
Right.
the EFS and Lambda part, one that I haven't used it yet for, but am interested in, I had to build a Lambda solution that would parse a 3 gigabyte flat file and find certain sections as a huge XML file. I basically did one Lambda that would scan the whole thing and find the start end sections, pump those out as start and end byte locations, and it was pulling byte sections via the S3. You can pull like a byte location of a file from S3 and kind of keep scanning to where you hit that timeout. Now you kind of don't do that as much with the larger timeout and then EFS too. And it was trying to mitigate some S3 transfer costs too.
Yeah, because that's still it. Because you still have to put out an availability zone. So yeah, it'd be a little bit cheaper for you too. I'm gonna go ahead and check real quick the meetup. Make sure that nobody is trying to get into the meetup. I don't see any posts, so that's good. Okay. Next one I saw that was pretty interesting. I got a couple in here, and we'll just run through them. Have you guys heard about Wavelength yet? Wavelength's an interesting one where the way I understand it is that they're putting edge compute inside telecommunications companies so that it runs things faster for you. So like gaming, IoT, and edge compute. So they just opened up a Boston and San Francisco Wavelength. So that would be pretty interesting. I know the big thing at reInvent when they talked about it was Verizon and Bethesda were using it for, I forget what game. They had a mobile game. I forget what the name was, but anyway, I just, something I thought was interesting. They came out with a new community builders program. So as some of you may or may not know, AWS has a bunch of different programs to recognize people who are helping support AWS and the adoption. So they have the ambassadors program, they have the APN ambassadors program. So I'm a member of the APN ambassadors, but they also have a new community builders program out there. So they've got the requirements on what it would take to become one of those. So if you're interested, I've got the blog post, and I'll post all of these out to the meetup as well. CJ, this might be interesting for you for this perspective, but I don't know how much you guys are actually, if you guys are actually running through the fraud detection, or if you spit this out to another financial services, because I know you guys do a lot of gambling with TwinSpires, but fraud detection is now generally available. I'm sure banks would be interested in looking at that. And then another big one, and this was probably a couple months ago, and I know we haven't had a meetup for like 4 or 5, but AWS app to container. So that's a tool that they're using that you supply them with your source code, and they will generate a container for you. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, it only supports Java and .NET, which probably is a large bit of their workloads. I know enterprises are probably mostly Java and .NET, or at least I'm just speaking from my experience. So that's pretty cool. I'm a big fan though of knowing what you're actually running and how it's actually built. So I don't know If anybody's done blog posts on that, like comparing running it and doing it yourself versus using app to container. I mean, AWS, the big thing is just being able to get your workload onto AWS, and I'm sure app to container helps with that. Has anybody used that yet or looked into it?
I tried it early stage. And it was, I'll say, interesting. It's gotten more polished now. I haven't checked it out in a couple of months again, but it definitely was nice to be able to use it as a springboard over into other containers because I was running some apps direct on server, not in any sort of container. So that was nice. It was helpful for onboarding some developers with it, but I can say I didn't use it much after the fact and kind of went more bespoke.
Okay. Well, thanks for that, CJ. And then I just have one last update, and I kind of have to just, in my mind, do it as a nice little plug. I talked about it at the CNCF meetup, but I actually gave a little bit of a preview at the CNCF meetup 1 or 2 meetups ago, but finally got it out there. So I have an Cloud Guru course out there, Advanced Networking with Kubernetes on AWS. So if you have any questions about how EKS is running from a networking perspective or from a Kubernetes perspective, I've got the course out there. If you have any questions about it as well, I've got the labs out there on GitHub. So I'll drop the link to this and the labs. So it's pretty exciting. That was about 8 months of my life outside of work. So just wanted to do a shameless plug. All right. With that, we can go ahead and get started with the actual presentation. So like I said, we're going to be talking about DevSecOps automation and how to get a NIST compliant CIS benchmarks. We're going to talk about a lot of those. Jason's got all of those memorized because he's our security SME here at Contino. So I'm going to do a DevSecOps intro. We're going to talk about what is needed from a compliancy and governance perspective for enterprises, how we can do this also at cloud service providers. We'll do some network and workload securities, and we've got some demos along the way if AWS wants to work with us. Jason was having some networking issues, so we'll see how those go, see if we've made the proper sacrifices to the demo gods, and if not, we've got all of this out there. You guys will get you the presentation, and I've got some of the demos out on GitHub as well. So like I said, if you have any questions as we walk through this time is for you guys as part of the community. So if you have any questions, just let me know. And can everybody see my screen? I want to make sure that you guys can all see the presentation and the agenda that's up on the screen.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Cool. All right. So just quick intro, myself, Cloud Native Director at Contino. I do a lot of things like this. I run the CNCF meetup here in Louisville. I run this AWS meetup, the co-chair DevOps NYC, and the Golang meetup here in Louisville. Do a lot of DevOps for our clients. Got several of the AWS certifications. I do a lot of just software development lifecycle with Docker, Kubernetes, all of those fun jazzes. Jason, I'll go ahead and let you give an intro.
Hi, I'm Jason Lutz, and I'm out of Phoenix, Arizona, so a little bit different time zone here. But I come from a traditional security background, moved into cloud with a company called Axway. We were a SaaS provider of different technologies. Then moved into a couple financial industries, Charles Schwab, Silicon Valley Bank, and I really wanted to participate or to see this shift left movement in security in the cloud. And so when Contino gave me the chance, I jumped on board. So I am consulting with Contino as a security consultant. I have several certifications. I think the most interesting one right now is the one I got today. I did an Alibaba security cert just to see what it was like, and I passed the exam today, so that was really cool. They got some interesting things over in Alibaba. But I do have a background with NIST cybersecurity framework, as well as ISO 27001. I'm a lead implementer, qualified for that, and various certs through ISACA regarding governance, risk, and so on. And I've really focused a lot on AWS. I've done some GCP certs as well as a security and a professional engineer. And I have a thing for Linux, so I got the Red Hat certified systems administrator. But yeah, today we'll talk about some different security frameworks and how that applies in the cloud, especially in regards to AWS.
Awesome, thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go ahead and just walk through what a traditional pipeline, or maybe even just a DevOps pipeline looks like, and then what we would see what a DevSecOps pipeline looks like. And I've got this over here and the cameras here. So got any questions, just hit me up. Jason, yell at me if I'm missing anything in the Zoom chat. So if we're looking at from a traditional security pipeline of when things need to get implemented, a lot of the times, and this is what we see a lot when we're working with clients and they try to engage us, is that security is an afterthought. It's bolted on. So you'll go through the normal development pipeline. We'll go through development. Maybe there's some security checks in there along the way. A lot of those are probably manual. You hand off, you put in a ticket with the security team and say, here's the repo, have them do their security prep, do whatever they need to. And then it's the back and forth between SLAs on tickets, and it just doesn't really jive well. And then maybe once you get those manual sign-offs, you'll be able to do a deployment. So it's a lot of wait time, a lot of documentations and spreadsheets back and forth. And it's a vicious cycle from that perspective. And the idea with DevSecOps, or at least in my mind, is doing development the right way, is security is integrated into the pipeline. So it's also part of the automation. So you see a lot of tools now coming out. I think GitHub just came out with their Dependabots, where it's checking your dependencies for you. So if a CVE comes out, you don't even have to do anything. It just, you still have to resolve it. But when a CVE comes out, it automatically alerts you because it knows you're running version 1.2 of struts, and it's telling you need to upgrade to version 3 because the CVE's out there and you don't want to end up like Target. So you have things from that perspective. There's lots of tools coming out nowadays that integrate into the pipeline that have APIs for you. So you've got the security validations, code quality validations. So you've got a lot of tools in there, and I'm trying to remember the big ones. There's so many tools out there. Jason, you gotta help me out with what some of the code quality checks are. Now, I was thinking Prisma because that's the one we're working with, but that's something different. But you want the whole idea around this for DevOps and automation is you want that fast feedback loop. So instead of waiting, till the end of your sprint or the end of and right before release, going in and getting the security review, it's integrated in. So as soon as you pull in a new package, you pull in a new or an older version of something, immediately, instead of waiting and having a security team tell you about that. Committing the code, building the code, having this all automated from this perspective. I'm going to do a demo later on about how this can all be integrated into code build and code pipeline. And then, of course, tests. Not only just writing unit tests and integration tests, but also having security tests involved in this as well. So not just handing it off and someone doing these manually, taking those tests that the security team has set up and actually having them part of the QA process, part of the CI/CD pipeline. And of course, if you're feeling comfortable, you're feeling giddy, you can go ahead and do that automated deployment because you've already satisfied what the security team needs because it's already been integrated into the pipeline. So the whole idea is that fast feedback loop, that fast cycle, so that you're not waiting, there's no manual handoffs, there's no tickets, it's all done and integrated into the pipeline. So from a DevSecOps pipeline, that's the idea here. I'm just gonna continue throughout all of this. I'm a big trying to get feedback. So is anybody actually running through and doing security checks into their pipelines like this? What do people's CI/CD pipelines actually look like? Have they even done just what I've talked about from being able to just do automatic builds and deploys? What are some of the pipelines looking at in the crowd here? CJ, you're not allowed to answer.
I can speak to what I worked on before Contino.
Sure, Mike.
Yeah, it was very much what you just mapped out here, right? Using Git, Jenkins, JFrog, Artifactory, right? Kind of, this is a couple years ago. And the big push was to work with the security to be more proactive. And so we pulled in that scanning, just like you mapped out here. So this is kind of validates it. And it was a big lift because we were working with hundreds of engineers who it was more work for them. But this was the idea, was to catch things earlier, right? And then there's a whole set of discussions around it. But yeah, this resonates in my head.
Andrew, are you lifting your hand or you're just hanging out?
Yeah, actually, I was going to say I've worked on a pipeline similar to what you've got on the bottom here. I use this is mostly by myself though, so it's not like I've got to set it up for a bunch of people to use. But I'm using GitHub Actions, and then on the AWS side, I'm using EventBridge to handle some of the build stuff. So what I'm doing is I use Actions to copy a file into S3, and then I use EventBridge to take that file and install it as a layer for Lambda, and then I test it on GitHub. So, and I have I do like some static analysis and stuff on the code, but nothing too rigorous yet.
And that's the nice thing about the pipelines, right? You can, as new requirements come in, you can just inject them into the pipeline in the right spot.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, awesome. Thanks for that. CJ, did you actually have something you wanted to talk about? I didn't mean to like immediately cut you off, but I know you're always doing some pretty advanced stuff.
Well, I've done both the janky kind and the good kind. Long time ago, in the .NET world, Fortify was kind of the running thing there for the code scanning, and in the CI system, it was kind of always thrown over the fence, and then the security team would come knocking on your door. Hey, have you seen this? And you as the developer, you'd be like, well, I don't know. What is this? I'm working on a feature right now, and it just wouldn't get priority. And so it's been great seeing these develop over time. And I've personally been looking into GitHub more so. Their dependency insights is great. Being able to automatically open pull requests with the version bump and everything. And then with their purchase of Simmel recently, their M&A, CodeQL has become quite a formidable thing to be able to give you vulnerability bits and pieces and PR level feedback of, hey, did you know that you just introduced this that's susceptible to SQL injection?
Yeah.
So they've been doing some great stuff there.
Interesting. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off everybody's dings. Give me 1 sec. I don't see that here.
Yeah. Hey, James, just some commentary, kind of, again, on that traditional security side, working for some of the banks, reviewing SaaS providers, definitely making sure that they are doing some type of static or dynamic testing in their secure development lifecycle. So, for example, we were using CSA, their CCM matrix, and what's called the CIQ. It's a questionnaire of how vendors are doing their security in the cloud, and we would definitely hammer on the vendors about whether or not they can prove to us that they've showed vulnerabilities were eliminated in the pipeline. So I believe some of the tools there were like Checkmarks and SonarQube. I'm not a developer, but yeah, those are some of the tools that we looked for outputs from the vendors.
SonarQube, that's the one I was looking for. SonarQube.
Yeah.
When I was talking about code quality validation, that's the one I was looking for. All right. Yep. Oh, thanks, guys. Awesome. So I talked a lot about like time to market and reducing that feedback cycle. So that's some of the benefits, obviously, that we talked about with the benefits of DevSecOps. So, sorry, I've got too many windows open and I didn't close out Slack. So give me 1 sec. Close. Bye, Slack. So when we talk about some of the benefits of DevSecOps, right? We've got the speed of delivery. I think I've already talked about that one. Speed of recovery is one of the other nice things too. Is like, I think CJ, you said it when the bump for the version for the rev. So if something does come down the pipe, if you need to be able to make changes, or even do pullback on things. If you've got the pipeline set up to be able to do that, it's pretty fast to be able to go back a version or up a version, and even from a code perspective as well. So, it's really for speed of recovery. That's a general DevOps benefit as well. Immutable infrastructure. I mean, if you have immutable infrastructure as one of your principles, you can't really you can say that if what you're running in production is what you're running in dev is what you're running in whatever, and you can prove these out because you're using that idea of immutable infrastructure. Again, from an auditor's perspective, you can say, I'm running this version here, and you can just prove it out from that perspective, and it's in the code, things like that. Security auditing, monitoring, and notification systems. Again, if what's running in the cloud or what's running on-prem, there's no really good way of doing this if you don't know what you're actually running, or if you don't actually know what you're monitoring, and you're not getting any of that feedback from the systems that you're running. So being able to integrate all of this into that whole pipeline and being able to run all of those, it's another huge benefit. And the big thing here that is these last two: security is federated, and DevSecOps fosters a culture of openness and transparency. When we say security is federated, it's not just now it's all the security team's job. It's also, I think Jason mentioned it before we started, was that shifting left, or maybe even in his introduction, is we're shifting left that security framework, is that now it's not just the security team, it's not just these guys, and it's behind these tickets or these white walls, or this, they're guarding everything. If the security team is opening up what their requirements are and they're sharing them with development teams, or they're codifying them into the pipelines and sharing these out, it's now the responsibility of the development teams to run these. And again, it fosters that openness, it gets that feedback loop faster, and even just helping out. So, if someone's doing something or discovers an issue in a Java framework that everyone's using, they can publish that out. So again, it's that benefit of now it's everyone's job, not just the individual security teams. My next button. And that's kind of what we talk about here when we're talking about a culture of security. You're increasing the communication between the security teams and the development teams, trying to break down those silos. That's one of the fostering ideas around DevOps, was breaking that silo between dev and ops, and now you're integrating security into that as well. Customer-focused organization. So because you're faster, you're more agile, you've integrated, you have a more secure product, you can get the requirements from your customers and you can get those out faster. Again, that's that time to market idea. And then agile and security, you're increasing the level of automation that, again, the idea around what DevOps has done, we're taking that focus and putting that level of automation both in the security team's hands and into the developers' hands as well. And then again, like I talked about previously, the ownership. Everyone is now responsible from a security perspective, and those closest to the code are empowered with the appropriate tools and processes to help drive that security agenda. So the security team sets, these are the guidelines, this is what we need to do. They help codify it, they publish those out to the teams, and then the teams can run those as part of their pipeline. And then they don't have to sit in status meetings, they don't have to put in tickets, and then everyone's happier because now we're able to implement features faster, which really that's what a developer is trying to do as well. So questions, comments, or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say I've seen this in other places. I like the way you describe it. Yeah, it's a challenge to get I think depending where you're at, right? What I've seen is if the developers are not used to security being a part of what they do, it can be a challenge, right, in the organization. I'm seeing it from having worked from the pipeline side.
Yeah, no, I agree. And even just from the security side, and just being able and taking those security teams and saying, you want me to code what? It's like, I got in security, so I didn't have to write code. Well, I mean, it's the same thing, same argument I heard from QA testers as well. I mean, everybody, the whole entire stack should be automated, and there should be code from that perspective. Even infrastructure engineers now, I mean, that's when you got infrastructure as code, that's, some people would argue it's scripting, but the code is now automatically deployed, the infrastructure is automatically deployed, QA is tested, and now it's part of the automation pipeline, and it's just pulling in the security now and automating those and the security checks from that perspective. So no AWS talk about security or AWS in general would be complete without using the shared responsibility model. So for those who haven't seen it, understand it, because you're running in the cloud, there are certain things that AWS are responsible for and responsible for securing, and those things that the end users are responsible for. So it's security of the cloud, not in the cloud. That's the differentiator that AWS uses, the vernacular that they use. So AWS, they're responsible for the software that's running the infrastructure that the cloud is running on top of. So that's the hypervisors, that's the storage, the network, the things that make the cloud run. That's AWS's responsibility from that perspective. And then from the customer's perspective, there's tools on top of that they run. So, if we're looking at it from a SaaS to an EC2 perspective, EC2, right, you're responsible still from the security of the operating system. So the patching, the vulnerability management, securing it from any of those perspectives, and there's sys benchmarks out there for that. So you're responsible for that, not the hypervisor's perspective. And if we keep moving up the stack, once we get up to like Lambda, you're only responsible for the security of the code in Lambda and not the OS patching and things like that, because you're not running those. So the responsibility model shifts up once you get into a SaaS perspective. So, and that's why things like Fargate and Lambda and all of those other things, you remove the operational burden of securing that infrastructure. Any questions on the responsibility model? I think this one was pretty straightforward, hopefully for the AWS community, but gotta always make sure that you cover that when we're talking about security of the cloud. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop talking and let Jason take over for us.
Yeah, so basically I'm really gonna address enterprise security for large entities. So generally in my view, security is kind of like an upside down wedding cake. You have your enterprise security compliance, you have your cloud security program, and then you have your workloads and network security that's within the cloud. So any organization, large organization, is gonna basically have a security program and possibly a cloud security program. As these companies are shifting to the cloud, they generally break out a security group just to do the governance over cloud security. So one thing that you'll definitely need in a security program is a security framework. The thing that's everybody's adopting now is the NIST cybersecurity framework. We're seeing that a lot, as well as the ISO 27001. We've seen that in companies that are usually international and go to specs that are European as well. So within cloud security, you really have cloud security posture management, and then you have your workload and network security. So things that are cloud security posture management are things like checking your account to make sure that you have all your controls in place and your guardrails in place, and then you could run compliance checks on those. And then with workload and network security, you're going to do things to secure the hosts and to look for any type of security issues at the workload area. So moving on to the NIST cybersecurity framework is just the framework I chose to talk about in this briefing. And so really the functions of this cybersecurity framework are identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And AWS actually uses that quite a bit when talking about the tools that they provide for both governance and security. So you'll see this in quite a few of their presentations. But there's definitely categories that fit into the functions. So I'm not going to read them all. That's quite an eye chart, but things like asset management, you're identifying the assets that you need to protect and the materials that you need to protect. Also in the identification is risk management, supply chains, governance. Protect, access control is part of protect. Awareness and training is also part of protection. So as James mentioned, the whole community being aware of the security, needing to be thought of at the beginning of any type of project or any type of development all the way through the end of that life cycle of that project. And going on down to things like detect, response planning, and recover. So, and all of those match up to NIST 853 controls that can be identified. So typically for the NIST cybersecurity framework, you're going to have technical controls and administrative controls. So I see a common pattern of people using the CSC 20 or the CIS 20 best security practices. So those are 20 controls and best practices. They actually break out to like 100 and some tasks. But those would be the technical controls that you would put in place, as well as administrative controls like having an information security program like 27001 and having basically the objectives to meet your CIA, your confidentiality, integrity, and availability aspects of information. So going on to compliance and governance. So again, we spoke about the different functions of the NIST cybersecurity framework. So identify, like I mentioned, AWS constantly talks about the tools and the services they give against the NIST cybersecurity framework. And this is just an example of that. So in the identify, you have things like Security Hub, AWS organizations, Control Tower, Trusted Advisor, Service Catalog, Config, and Systems Manager that would meet the identify part of the NIST cybersecurity framework. And then moving on to protect, things like the VPC itself, Direct Connect, Resource Access Manager, Directory Services, Shield, Secrets Manager, KMS, Cognito, WAF. These are all things that are involved in the protect piece of the NIST cybersecurity framework. And then moving on to detect, things like Guard Duty, Macy, Inspector, and Security Hub, so that you can find any abnormalities in your cloud environment or your configurations. And we'll go into Security Hub in a little bit. And then respond. So things that you can have set up to respond to incidents with automations, things like CloudWatch, Systems Manager, and Lambda would be used to automate responses to any type of security event that occurs within your cloud environment. And things used for investigations, CloudWatch, CloudTrail, Health Dashboard, Route 53, and recover, S3 and Glacier to back up your data and to make sure that you can recover that data in the event of a security incident. So moving on to the next slide. We're talking really about the services and tools. And again, this is just a different way of showing that these different services that AWS has align with basically this cybersecurity framework. And we're going to talk a lot about config, Control Tower, Security Hub, and the CIS benchmarks today. So moving on, right now would probably be a good time to talk about AWS Control Tower and AWS organizations. So there's a couple ways to make sure that you provision your accounts with the right guardrails in place. So when I say guardrails, those are basically security controls or secure configurations that you really need to have in place within all your accounts. So things like making sure that all your logs are available within all your accounts, so that when an auditor comes and says, hey, you have 100 AWS accounts and some of them don't have logging, some of them don't have password policies, some of them don't have MFA. You just have people basically doing that shadow IT and launching AWS accounts and not having those guardrails in place. AWS Control Tower is really the solution for that AWS is offering. James and I were also working on a project that's more agnostic in creating these guardrails through automation using Terraform. And we're crossing the borders here from Azure and GCP as well as AWS, but AWS Control Tower is a good service that will allow you to provision accounts and make sure that those guardrails are in place. And there are guardrails that are recommended by AWS, and I'll demonstrate those. So switching to my screen, and again, James might have mentioned that I am having some network issues, and it may be actually AWS. I do see something on my personal health dashboard showing me that there's an open issue. But looking at Control Tower, it's a service within AWS, and basically you set up your landing zones. So for example, right here, I'm showing me that there's 2 organizational units. There's 3 shared accounts, and there's a native cloud directory, and there's 20 preventative guardrails. So we'll talk more about those guardrails. But if anybody's new to AWS organizations, that's where the organizations units come in. So organizations is a way to consolidate not only your billing, but also services that you can control all down through your sub accounts. So basically you have a master account, and then when you create new accounts and they're part of your organization, you can do things like enact service control policies that will help limit what people can do within their AWS accounts. So for example, that situation that I talked about where, let's say a company has 100 AWS accounts and they don't want people disabling, for example, CloudTrail or config rules or whatever it is, you would use service control policies, SCP policies, to make sure that they cannot disable those. And we'll talk about that. But looking at the dashboard for Control Tower, you can see that I've just created basically 4 accounts. It creates for you an audit account and a log archive account. And I added basically a sub account and the Meetup account. So all of these are within Control Tower, and it provides your organizational units that you can apply your SCPs to. And here you can see your accounts. These accounts I've created just for this demonstration, and they'll go away shortly after this. And the main thing that I really wanted to point out here, though, is the guardrails. So James and I, we've been involved with a couple of engagements that have called for guardrails to be put in place. So you could do that as well with automation, such as Terraform. But here, AWS is doing this for you. So if you just want to read a couple of these, like disallow deletion of log archives. So preventing anybody from deleting log archives, that makes sure you have your governance around the accounts that you create within Control Tower. So these are things that you don't want your users or the owners of those sub accounts to change, and therefore you're enforcing governance on the accounts below. You'll also notice that there's different behaviors, prevention and detection. Generally, and this is just a general statement, prevention is done by SCPs, the service control policies, and detection is usually done by config rules. And we'll also talk about config. But since I've had some networking issues, I've decided to pull up organizations on a different tab. That way we can look at that. So now that you have Control Tower and you've launched Control Tower, it's basically using organizations to create that underlining base of your AWS accounts. So for those that haven't really looked at organizations, it's a great way to keep track of all your accounts, to enforce the compliance by the use of OUs and SCPs. So here you see that you have a master account and then these sub accounts. The organizational units, you can put your accounts into these organizational units and then apply SCPs to those. So these different accounts have particular SCPs that go to the accounts. And hopefully I'm using terminology that's familiar to everybody, and I'm not just assuming some things. So if there's anything out there that you need me to clarify, please let me know. But again, service control policies are a way of pushing governance down to your accounts. And let's take a look at some of these. So these are guardrails that were put in by Control Tower. And so if I look at these and I go to details, you could see the JSON file that shows what's enforcing. And so if you've ever had to take an AWS security exam or even just an AWS exam, I think it goes quite in depth on IAM and policies. And these are very similar to the IAM policies. It's just basically doing denies on certain actions that you don't want to occur in the sub accounts that you have within your AWS organization. And another thing that organization provides for is consolidated billing. So there's some issues with that. So if you use automation to create multiple accounts, just be aware that you have to have a unique email address for each account, and also be aware that removing an account from organizations is quite a task. You have to set up billing for that. AWS definitely wants their money. So before you detach an account from an AWS organization, you really have to set up that billing to be able to detach it and then delete it. You could also do stuff like suspend accounts as well, and they'll drop from the AWS org within 90 days. So moving on to, we'll go back to the slides, James. So I'll let James take over here, but I just wanted to say that guardrails are really different than like the CIS benchmarks. The guardrails are really to establish good account governance and security. As far as the actual checks, that's where the CIS benchmarks come in, and I'll pass that to James.
Gotcha. Thanks, Jason. So when we start talking about what an actual benchmark is and these guardrails, so those guardrails, benchmarks, kind of similar. So CIS, they put out benchmarks for AWS. They've got benchmarks out for Docker, Kubernetes, just lots of different ones, the different versions of Linux, things like that. So they'll put out what they would consider a secure account posture is. And they've got about over 100 different benchmarks. There's tools out there. I'm going to demonstrate one later called Prowler. That's an open source tool that allows you to score your accounts against the CIS benchmarks. It's an open source tool. It's pretty fun. There's some other tools out there from a commercial perspective. I know Prisma Cloud's a big one. There's a couple other, I think Security Hub does this as well for you. And if Jason's networking is working, we'll go ahead and we'll demo out Security Hub as well. But from a breakdown perspective, they've got these up in these focus areas. So identity access management. So of course, from an IAM perspective, if you're working in AWS, you're working in security, IAM is going to be a big focus because you don't want just to allow access on all the resources in there. So you want to lock down from a least privileged perspective. So IAM, it'll score that for you. Logging, you want to make sure that, how do you know what's happening inside of an account? So you've got CloudTrail, CloudWatch, things like that. Will I think part of security does that as well. But again, CloudTrail is a big one for you, just from a base understanding of what's going on inside your account and who's doing what. I think it's gotten to, initially when CloudTrail was released, it didn't record it unless you told it to. Now it does at least 7 days worth of information. So any API request that's happening inside the account is logged from a CloudTrail perspective for 7 days without you having to do anything. But you should enable that so you have log retention for that perspective. VPC flow logs are another big one. So just understanding from a network attack perspective, knowing who's talking to what and on what ports, and from that perspective. And then of course, monitoring and networking. You're doing all of this, you're monitoring who's using the account from the CloudTrail perspective. You can log who has access to what based off of their IAM privileges, and then just alerting on changes in the environment that shouldn't be happening. So from a networking perspective as well, you've got the security groups, you've got VPC peering, you've got lots of network tools to be able to control the ingress and egress perspective. So when we look at, I think this has got Jason back for us. He's going to walk through just one of the examples of the CIS benchmark.
Yeah, just a little deep dive. And I don't know the depth that people on this call have gone into security, but if they haven't seen the CIS benchmarks for AWS, definitely check them out. And one thing, it's a very big document. It goes through a lot of checks. The appendix is basically a list of all those things that are checked. But this is an example of one. This is a really easy one. Ensure multi-factor authentication is enabled for all IAM users. So that's just one item that CIS recommends that is a configuration that needs to be applied within your AWS account. So as James mentioned, we will run an open source checking tool. There's things out there like Prisma, Dome9, and Security Hub that'll do these checks for you. But CIS really goes into depth and tells you why these certain controls are called for. MFA is kind of obvious, but it will give you a description. So one, if you're an auditor of AWS, you definitely want to be aware of what CIS has out there. And it even tells you how to audit it, both from the console and through the CLI. So going on to the next slide, it also
They're very
tells you.
similar. So yeah, this is the audit one.
Yep. And then this is all within just one control. And then it tells you how to remediate as well. This is kind of squished just to show it wasn't really meant to read, but it's just showing that the CIS benchmarks are pretty in-depth, and they tell you exactly how to remediate the issue if, for example, you don't have MFA enabled. So that's going over the CIS benchmarks. So I'll pass it back to James to do a demo of Prowler.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and see if we can get this up and running, because I've been messing around with things as well. So let's go ahead and check to see which AWS account I'm pointing at. Yep, there we go. I'm pointing at mine. I think I've got it installed, so I just need to, nope, I don't. So let's go ahead and just pull up and run through this. I want to show you. I think there's an npm install. So it is an open source tool, it's this benchmarking tool, and it's going to run through and do all of the checks for us. So I've got AWS set up. I've got all of these things. So let's go ahead and just, actually, it probably doesn't install it and run it for us. So let's go ahead and let me figure out where I installed Prowler at, and we'll go from there. So sorry guys, I didn't have this actually set up. There we go, Prowler. And I think I don't need any switches because I have mine set up. So you can have it do specific checks or run through all of them. And I'm just gonna go ahead and let it rip and show you what it looks like. You guys can see my screen, right? It's gonna take a few minutes to go ahead and get up and running, but what it's doing is it's gonna go out to my AWS account that I have up there, and then it's going to run through, and I think I've got it set up to the US West 2. So if we look at the identity access management, so it's going to start going through all of those. So in the background right now, it's going through and iterating all of my IAM accounts that I have up there. It's probably looking at the privileges that those have. So it's running through all of those checks. So that MFA check that Jason just talked about, and those 100+ benchmarks that we just worked through, it's running through and looking at all of those and reporting those. So it's going to take a few seconds. I probably should have started this before it started up, but let's, Jason, I'm going to let this run. I'm going to flip back to the slides, and I think we're going to talk about Security Hub. So we're going to let this run for a few minutes.
Sure.
And we're going to go ahead and switch back to the slides and let you walk through what Security Hub looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and pull those up. So I'm going to let that run because it's going to take a few minutes for it to go ahead and kickstart. But there you go, Jason.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that Dome 9 and Prisma could be used against your AWS accounts to ensure compliance. But AWS also has tools. One of the tools out there is AWS Security Hub. And AWS Security Hub has some interesting features. And one use case, for example, would be here you have your multiple accounts at the bottom, AWS account A, B, and C, all sending their data. AWS Security Hub really uses AWS config to grab that data. And then you could forward those events, for example, to your SIEM if you have Splunk or QRadar or whatever you're using to look at your security events. So AWS Security Hub is integrated with a lot of products out there. I just list a few here like CyberArk, Prisma, QRadar, Qualys, and Twistlock. So you can also send events from those tools to Security Hub as well. So I'm going to grab the screen again, and let's see if we take a look at Security Hub a little bit. So hopefully my network issues are not having too much of a problem here. Let's go into Security Hub.
Well, Jason's pulling that up. What kind of security tools are you guys using? Are you guys using any security tools for your cloud deployments or running anything? I mean, even on-prem as well. Nobody? Okay. Go ahead, Jason.
I would be shocked if most organizations aren't using at least something like Dome 9 or Prisma. It's really important to keep track of all those configuration issues. But this is the dashboard for Security Hub. It's not impressive. I don't have too many accounts created. I just have those 4 that are within my organization. But a good thing that we could show here is that you could have different standards. So those CIS, AWS Foundations benchmarks, that's the thing that Prowler is looking for. It's also the document that we had talked about, as well as AWS best practices. And here you have PCI DSS. So if you have that need for that standard. So if I come into here, Foundations benchmarks, you could see that it's calling out that root accounts being used, MFA is not really set up, and so on. So these are all the benchmarks, and you can see them by the CIS number and the checks that need to happen and occur. Another interesting thing about Security Hub is they have these things called insights. So these are kind of common security issues that Security Hub can report on, and you can look at these different insights. So these would be of high interest to your security operations centers guys, and you would see like if they got their findings from Security Hub, they could go into these insights and take a look at how to address those findings. So related to Security Hub, I also wanted to mention AWS Config. So there's also there's a tool that's very similar to Config called App Config. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for Config. So anybody that might be new to AWS, what Config does is it basically keeps track of any changes to your AWS environment and it records that historically. So this is another great tool for governance and compliance. If you have an auditor that needs to see what changes occurred to your environment, Config would be the place to go. So there's a dashboard config for Config, and what's really cool here is they offer conformance packs. So these are also checks that occur with using config rules, and as you'll see, they have a conformance pack aligned with the NIST cybersecurity framework. So if I come here and look at the different conformance packs that they have, you know, you have your control tower detective guardrails. Those are those guardrails that control tower puts in place when you launch control tower. You have your best practices, and look at here, you also have your CIS best practices as well as NIST. So some of the things that we had talked about. So
hey, Jason, interesting note here. It's timing out on IAM, so I'm guessing that it wasn't a network issue. I'm guessing they're actually having issues, so that's always fun.
Yeah, I've been seeing this.
There is an IAM issue right now.
I really think someone at AWS kind of timed it for us just right, just for our meetup.
So that's fun.
I'm joking around.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did see that there. So it wasn't just me. So.
Prowler just came back and said it timed out connecting to IAM, so that's fun.
There you go. Yeah. So the cool thing about AWS Config, it inventories all your resources. So hey, if that's one of your security controls that you need to meet, like in your security standard, that's usually 40 pages. It's going to say you need to know all your assets within the cloud. Config will do that for you. It'll gather all the information for you. You can also put in rules of your own. Here you can see some rules such as making sure that there's encrypted volumes, access keys are rotated, and so on. So this is local to that one account. If you want to look at the configuration situation in all your accounts, you would use a config aggregator. So here is the dashboard for the config aggregator, and it's looking at multiple accounts. So you can see all those accounts in my organization that's reporting resources, and you can see that these are not very compliant, but these were just set up for a demo. So that's a review of AWS Security Hub that uses config underneath to basically gather those findings, as well as looking at AWS config and AWS config aggregator. These are very important tools that would be used in governance. All right. So I think it's back to you, James.
All right, so I switched up Prowler to run against not the IAM ones. So Prowler allows you to do different groups, and actually I'll show you what it looks like from a failure perspective because my account is, it's failing. So let me pull up my screen share on that.
Yeah, AWS is definitely having issues.
Well, this is failures just from a the
perspective.
config perspective, yeah. So it's looking at and seeing if CloudTrail's enabled for all regions, right? So I only use one region, so it's probably looking at all of them. So I'm getting failures across the board here. So, the bucket logs are not publicly accessible. Well, if I don't have CloudTrail enabled in all regions, I'm not going to have buckets. So you see it's looking at all of the regions across all of that. So this is fun. It's looking like I don't have any encryption keys, so this is looking at everything across those regions. So it's a fun little tool to help. I think it also does specific outputs as well. So I'm going to go ahead and let that run through, and I'm going to go back to the presentation. So we talked a lot about, so that was the account, like cloud account posture management. So there's some things from so we want to shift to workloads running in the cloud. So now we've talked about how to secure the accounts, how to use some of the tools to make sure that those accounts are secure at scale with using config, security hub, and control tower. So looking at some of the components of running workloads, so NIST as well as CIS, they have the specific things out there for determining what the major risks are. So you got image vulnerability. So we're talking about from a container perspective, and that also feeds into the demo that I'm gonna do for ECR. So from a container security perspective, right, you've got image risks and you've got risks on running the registry. So vulnerabilities, insecure configuration, connections, and then of course orchestration. When we look at that's from the Kubernetes perspective of having unbounded admin access, unauthorized access, not being able to segregate network traffic. So being able to assess, and again, using something like a tool like Prowler, an open source tool, or something to configure and scan those. I'm going to talk about ECR, and then there's a couple tools. I don't know if Security Hub, Jason, do you know if it does any checks against the security that you have set up for your EKS clusters or anything like that? Probably doesn't.
I don't believe it does.
So if we're talking again from a containerization perspective, we've talked about Prisma. Prisma just purchased Twistlock, so Twistlock does that. Aqua, Sysdig. There's a couple other tools out there that are, at least from a containers perspective, but this is an AWS talk, so I'm gonna go ahead and look at the container security perspective, and we're gonna look at ECR. So from an ECR perspective, they just released, I say just, I don't know how long ago it was, but they do vulnerability scanning of image containers and being able to do, I'm looking at this. This is the same copy of the notes from the previous slide, so those are wrong. So let's go ahead. I'm going to pull up my application that I've got for this, and we can see that, oh, so it's failed. So that's fun. So it did the CMK checks, it did the CloudTrail logs checking, and then it did the VPC flow logs. So all of my default VPCs look like they don't have any logs, and then some of my other ones don't. So I've got a pretty insecure account from a logging perspective. So that's not good, but anyway, good to know, right? Knowledge is power. So let me go ahead and go out to my application that I've got set up for this. GitHub, DevSecOps pipeline, gotta go out to me, DevSecOps. This is the funness with the Go. So I've got an image build here. So I've got an application. It's a Go application that just does simple. I think it just does the. It's just a regular old application that runs one of my example apps that I have. So I can run it. I can do tests. here locally, but I can also build it. So I've got it building both. I can build it both locally and in code spec. So I've got, I don't know how many of you guys are fans of wow, I cannot talk right now. The Three Musketeers framework from a development perspective. So Three Musketeers, it's Make, Docker, and Docker Compose. So I've got all of this set up from a testing perspective in a Make file. So I'm going to go ahead and build my application and deploy it to using build spec, but I just want to show you the ECR stuff. So I've got the ECR scan findings here from an image perspective. So I'm going to build an image locally. I'm going to up-rev the version, build the image locally, and then I'm going to have ECR do the scan for me. I can already see that there's an issue here with my AWS account ID. So I'm going to go ahead and run the scan on a previous image. Let me pull up my AWS account and pull that for you. So I'm logged in. Let me go to ECR and pull an image version for you. I can also kick it off here as well in the wow, nothing's working. I can't speak. I've got typos in my make file, and I'm not logged in. So give me 1 sec to log back in. So one of the nice things from an immutability perspective that ECR just released is that I don't know how much you guys know about image tags, but image tags are mutable. The only thing that's not is the SHA on those tags. So that's why one of the best practices from a containers perspective is to not use latest. Well, even if you version that, so you say I'm using version 1.2, 1.2 is still a mutable tag. So what ECR has added on top of that is it doesn't allow you to push new tags or push new images to the same tag. And I'll show you an example of that, because my build actually failed because I have the immutability tag set for this. I'm not in London again. I was doing work earlier looking for something that we deployed out into London. Wow, oh, I've got to switch accounts, sorry guys. The way that we have things structured, I just logged into our root account, so I have to assume the role into my account. So I've got this Golang example here, and I think I've done this presentation for Atlanta as well, but I'm going to go ahead and show you that I've got several versions here. If I were to try to push this again to 18, it would fail, and I want to show you what that failure looks like from a code build perspective. So I've got in code build, I've got it building the actual image for us. So if we see what this last build was, you'll see that I did this. So this one was the 27 days ago. What's the actual build that I did today where it failed? Let me go to pipeline. Got too many tools. Not data pipeline. Wow, I am. So how's everybody else doing today? My Prowler demo failed because the IAM was broken. My pipeline's failing. So I tested this about an hour ago, and because of the immutability setup that I have, it was not able to build that image because it wasn't pushing it with the same version number. So right now I've got a version 19, and what this is telling me right here, I'm trying to build, I'm trying to push that version for 19. So what I just did a little while ago, oh, I already have an example 20. So let's go ahead and commit a new version and up-rev that one and try to push that one as well. So it's on my version.tx. I've revved it to 20, and just because I know we haven't done 1.20 yet, I'm going to go ahead and push that. So git status, git add. I can type. And with pipeline, it's set up and it's got a webhook into GitHub. So code pipeline is going to kick off and run my build now for me. So let's go ahead if what I just said is true. Let's go back. This is the automation portion that we've talked about. Let's go ahead and see if it actually kicked it off for us. Let's start the build manually. Why not? You know, it's not going to let us. Wow, I am struggling across the board today, guys. I apologize. So let's go ahead and go back into code build and get that deploy running on that build. Go in pipelines. Oh, there we go. It's in progress. It saved me. So it's ran. It's pulled it from GitHub. It's running the report for us, and let's see the build. It's not built yet, so it's running the report in progress for us. I'm trying to remember what I set this report up. I think this was for the code quality test. So let's go ahead and look at it and see what this is doing for us. I know this was supposed to be on the ECR one, but this is running and building out doing that test for us. So it's building our application, and it's going to run through and do that test. So while that's running in the background, let me actually pull up the code and show you what this is actually doing from a pipeline build perspective. So if we go into, I think this was the static build spec. Is this the test? It's doing a couple different things from a pipeline perspective. It's not the build, because this is the build that I was talking about. This is the build that the Docker push that failed earlier because the rev was the same. We're not going to be doing the deploy just yet. Should be doing the static build spec. Yeah, because this is doing the test for us. So it's running through. It's doing the go install for us because of the version that we're using isn't, and it's doing the make go report. So it's using that make file to do our reporting for us. And I'm trying to remember what the make report does. I know there's a Go tool out there that will tell us if we're adhering to certain standards. So it's running that Go reporter for us, and it's outputting. So it's doing that Go report for us. That's one of the steps that it's doing, and then it's going to build and run that for us. So that one succeeded, and it should have ran to the next one, where it's going to do that build and push it to ECR for us. I just wanted to show you the full life cycle of the pipeline. Go back to the pipeline. In progress. So it's building the application for, so it's doing that Docker build. Super exciting. Watching logs. So we're waiting for that to start. And when that starts, it's going to kick off it's going to push it to ECR for us. And that should be a new version. And it will allow us to do that. So while that's building, let me show you the ECR report that it does from a vulnerability perspective. Because I've got it to kick off a scan as soon as it pushes. So we've got our Golang example here. We're at version 19. So if we look at the scan, oh, look at that. It's also told us now that Alpine's not supported. So I'm wondering if this is an older version of Alpine. So I've only got the 19 tag here. So that's fun. Wow. Anyway, so ECR will do the vulnerability scanning for us. It will report on if there are any CVEs out there on what you're using and testing with. So like with any tool, whether it supports it or not. I thought it was Clara on the back end, but there's other open source tools out there that will do this scanning and vulnerability stuff for you. So Sysdig, Aqua, Twistlock, they all do the vulnerability scanning for what's running inside the container. So I apologize, that demo was terrible. At least the code build was working. Let's see if it actually pushes that instance for us and that version. Is this the old one? This might be the old one. So yeah, this is 19. That one already exists. So here, let me actually show you. There you go. So this is immutable and can't be overwritten. Now, normally, from a Docker registry perspective, I would be able to overwrite this because there's no enforcements on that. So Docker Hub, Nexus, JFrog, they don't have these capabilities in there. So this is just something that is configurable from an ECR perspective. So it can't overwrite 19. Let me go ahead and see if the build that we were running actually ran for us. So it's still in progress. Let's see what it's at. It's going to show us the actual log. Probably gonna pull up the CloudWatch logs. So it's still doing, I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen a Docker build. So it should push the image to ECR, and the ECR is gonna do the automatic scan for us. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump back to the presentation so we can work through and wrapping this up with you guys, because we got a couple more slides. I've got this makefile out there as well, so if you wanted to look and see how the build spec all ties together, it's out there as well, and it also does the deployments to Kubernetes for you. So as soon as the build succeeds, pipeline would push that also to the cluster for us. I know that was a terrible demo, and I was walking through it and questioning. Do you guys have any questions on that? That terrible demo that I just did for you? How many of you guys have a build pipeline for your containers, or are you actually, are any of you using containers?
Yeah.
No? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I use all the code build code pipeline tools, and I've got a couple that are doing similar to this. They don't use the ECR scanning because same problem. They're using a unsupported image, base image type. So pretty familiar with that little area there myself.
Yeah, and it looks like something, it was tagged properly, but it wasn't able to push it for some reason. So, oh, because the account ID is missing right there. Probably because of that issue in the makefile. Because this is all using the makefile so that I can simulate the builds locally as well as inside code builds. So with that typo in the account ID, it wasn't able to push it properly. So that's fun. That's good to know. Somebody wants to put in a PR to fix that. It's out there on GitHub. How are you finding code build and code pipeline? When it first came out, it was bare bones, but I think they're getting better at it. I still haven't used code commit for anything.
I only use code commit whenever I'm doing a demo and I need to be able to bootstrap an account from end to end, and I don't want to have to deal with a GitHub access token or something like that. But no, code build and code pipeline have been treating me pretty well. I'm about to try out their recent release of the matrix builds. That's a common feature that you see with other build tools. I mean, Travis, Circle, all of those have the matrix builds. GitHub Actions has a matrix build where you can, run on different OSs and different steps across them all. But they just recently released a parallel build for code build.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've seen that I've been using GitLab a lot recently. In each stage, each job, you can specify what container that you want to run things in.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. Alrighty, let's go ahead. I think we've only got one or two more slides, guys. Just this Contino's approach to DevSecOps. A lot of what we talked about previously. You've got the infrastructure as code now. You've got QA and testing all integrated and running as code inside of the pipeline. So in order to integrate compliance and security, those things should be running as code and integrated into the pipelines as well for that faster feedback loop. If you got any other questions, we've got a demo out there for compliance as code on AWS, and then we've got a couple for vaulting as well from a security perspective, and then we've got a DevSecOps best practices white paper. I think that is it from that perspective. Yeah. So you guys have any questions, comments, thoughts? Jason, do you have any closing thoughts?
I would just say my weak spot really is on the containerization and container security. Looking at some of the tools like Prisma, they have some really cool automated stuff that allows you just really look at findings, but I really want to dig into some of the things that you're talking about. So I think that's my next area. I just would say that it's exciting to see a lot of organizations go into the cloud, and it's interesting to see how each organization takes a different approach to security. And unfortunately, It hasn't been too uniform in the industry from my experience, but seems like Amazon is really tacking on the tools that companies need to prove to the risk management teams that they're locking their environments down and that they can audit those environments and get the information they need. So
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna, just because I wanted to show you, I think, oh yeah, that's why I have the Debian in here. I just want to be able to show you some of the critical vulnerabilities because I know 9.5 was in there. Yeah, let's go ahead and pull that up. I had to show you something that was actually working and what it looks like from that perspective. So of course, AWS will score those for you and tell you exactly what the CVE is and what the issue is from those perspectives. So this is what some of the findings look like in ECR for you. We can also push, there's 10. 10 doesn't look as bad. Some issues with GCC and things like that. So this is just part of the scans as well. So let's see if we can actually kick off a scan. Yeah, we can.
are you sharing?
Oh, am I not sharing anymore?
No.
Thanks, Jason.
No problem.
Let me, which desktop was it? Yeah. So I just kicked off a scan in progress here from ECR. So this is just the base Debian image. And I want to show you. So it's running a scan right now. And then I'll show you what some of these findings look like. So you got 3 critical findings here. They give you the CVE and the link to them and a little bit of a description of what's going on. So you got 3 critical vulnerabilities on here. Obviously, you can pull from the API perspective. If you wanted to stop a deployment, you could just pull these scans and look at those. So if you were looking at the deployment perspective, you could put a gate in there that says if they've got any critical vulnerabilities in the results from the API scan, then obviously you don't want to allow that to go through from a deployment perspective. So that's one way you could put in gates from an automation perspective. Anyway, I just had to show you because I felt bad about that, not the demo not actually working. So there's what it looks like from my perspective, from that perspective. All right. With that, you guys have any closing questions, comments, thoughts?
I'm just curious if it's common for anybody out there to use things like control tower or organizations, or the usually desperate accounts. But
I don't use Control Tower. Unfortunately, some of its feature set overlapped with previous infrastructure. So it didn't really make sense to tear down, just to rebuild to be able to get some of the additional stuff. Did take disparate, as you were saying, accounts and combine them into organizations. Once that came out and got more accessible, that's been nice to be able to put, the service control policies in place as an additional layer for prevention. And then rolling up for master billing was nice too in that situation.
Yep.
Chris, I just saw your comment. Hopefully your moves to code pipeline and image builds go better than my demo just went.
This was really nice because this is my first time at your meeting, but I started playing with NIST 5+ years ago, and then next company I went to was playing with it. So it's just nice to meet different people coming at it differently, right? And that was a great set of tools. I got some homework for myself just to go through and play with it myself. So I got a lot out of it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll pull those down, and all of the tools that we talked about and we demoed, I'll post the links to them to the meetup.
Yeah, I want to go play with it.
Hi guys. Well, thanks for coming. And if you guys have any ideas on next AWS meetups, like topics that you want to talk about, I've actually got in contact with our region's developer evangelist for AWS. So she's got links into being able to pull speakers from AWS. So if you guys have any topics that you want to hear or talk about, let me know, and I'll be putting a survey together to put out to the community so that we can get more information. So that hopefully will make it so that we're a little bit more on a better cycle with speakers from the AWS perspective. So if you you guys have any ideas, let me know. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a nice night. Bye.
Thanks again.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.